Snow Ridge, a quiet Colorado town tucked beneath winter-heavy mountains, the kind of place where people still waved from their porches and snowplows rattled down Main Street before dawn. On that particular evening, the cold felt sharper, the air thinner, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Ellie Carter, 7 years old, bundled in her puffy blue coat and red knit mittens, walked the short distance from Carter's Auto, her father's repair shop, to their small rental house across Pine Grove Road. She'd done it 100 times. Folks in town often said, "Snow Ridge is the safest place west of Denver," and most believed it. But every safe place has one night when something shifts. Inside the shop, her father, Ben Carter, grease on his knuckles, grief tucked into the quiet spaces of his face, glanced up at the clock, blinking 6:02 p.m. He waited, expecting Ellie to burst in, asking for hot chocolate, or showing him a rock she found in the snow. Instead, only the hum of the old heater answered him. He stepped outside. Snow drifted softly, swirling under the streetlight. "Ellie!" Once, twice, louder. The mountains did not echo back. Ellie had vanished. Ben sprinted toward the road, boots slipping over black ice. Headlights from a passing SUV revealed a small red mitten, half buried in the snow. He froze, breath shattering in the cold. He picked it up with trembling fingers and whispered, "Ellie, baby, where are you?" Neighbors stepped out onto their porches. Mrs. Halpern in her plaid robe, Joe Riley still wearing his Denver Broncos cap. Everyone scanned the road, the yards, the thinning pine trees behind the auto shop. And then the truth settled in like a weight. A child didn't just wander off. Not in this cold. Not tonight. The Sheriff's Department arrived quickly, radios crackling through the storm. Deputy Mark Hansen spoke gently. "Ben, we'll find her. Kids don't just disappear around here." But in his eyes, Ben saw a thin thread of dread, the kind adults try to hide when children are in danger. Flashlights swept the snow, slicing long shadows across the road. Someone called out, small footprints leading toward the tree line. "Why the woods?" Ben whispered. "Ellie hates the dark." No one answered. The storm thickened, rolling in like a door shutting behind the world they knew. Miles away, at the K9 unit, Kane, Snow Ridge's retired police dog, lifted his head. Something trembled in the air. His ears snapped forward. A low, uneasy whine pushed from his throat. "Kane? What's got into you, buddy?" The night attendant muttered, reaching for the latch. But Kane had already pushed past him. Eyes locked on the storm outside, nose lifted toward something only he could sense. Fear, faint and childlike, drifting through the snow. Back near the woods, voices faded into the howling wind. Sheriff Lowell radioed, "Visibility's dropping. We need more hands." Ben stood at the edge of the trees, clutching Ellie's mitten, refusing to let it numb in his fist. He listened to the wind and with a voice cracked open by terror, whispered, "Please, someone find her." And miles away, Kane broke into a run. "Mark," the attendant said, breathless over the phone. "Kane's acting like he knows something." Mark's voice tightened. For the first time that night, hope sparked. "Then let him go," he said. "Let him find her." Kane was already gone, cutting through the storm, driven by a single, unmistakable truth. A little girl's scent, faint, but begging not to disappear. The storm over Snow Ridge thickened into a white wall, swallowing streetlights one by one as Kane tore across the station's icy parking lot. The retired K-9 had not moved like this in months, not since leaving active service. But something in the wind struck him deeper than memory. It was as if the cold carried a thread of scent that didn't belong to winter at all. Something warm, frightened, and heartbreakingly small. The night attendant shouted after him, boots slipping on frozen pavement. "Kane! Hey! Slow down!" But Kane didn't slow. He didn't even look back. His stride was steady, low, purposeful, like a compass drawn toward true north. Deputy Mark Hansen arrived just in time to see Kane break through the drifting snow toward Pine Grove Road. Mark's headlights caught the silhouette, a dark shape pushing against the storm with an urgency that made his pulse jump. "Easy, buddy," he murmured, stepping out of the cruiser. But Kane barked once, not for attention, but for warning. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Mark crouched beside him, breath clouding the freezing air. "Show me," he whispered. Kane didn't wait. He pivoted sharply and sprinted down the road, nails scraping against ice, tail straight like an arrow. Mark radioed in. "I've got Kane tracking, heading north toward the woods." Then he ran after him. The snowstorm thickened until the world shrank into a narrow tunnel of gray and white. Houses blurred behind curtains of wind. Yard lights flickered. A UPS truck crawled up the hill, the driver slowing as he spotted Mark chasing a dog through the storm. "Everything all right, officer?" Mark shook his head, barely slowing. "Missing child. Dog picked up a trail." The driver's face changed instantly. Fear, sympathy, the quiet understanding of how a world can narrow to a single life in danger. "Godspeed." Inside the woods, Kane stopped so abruptly that Mark nearly collided with him. The dog's nose pressed into a small indentation, barely there, already softening in the snow, but unmistakable. A child's footprint. Kane nudged the depression gently, then looked up at Mark with eyes bright and urgent. "Ellie," Mark breathed, heart sinking and lifting all at once. "Good boy. Keep going." They pushed deeper into the forest, branches snapping softly under their weight. The wind howled overhead, but near the ground, the air carried faint traces of something sweeter. Bubblegum shampoo, fabric softener, a child's winter coat warmed by body heat. Kane inhaled deeply, chest expanding, ears pricking like antennae tuned to a frequency only he could hear. Every shift of the wind knit together a clearer path, and Kane followed it without hesitation. Then, a lull in the storm. Just enough for Mark to hear Kane's low rumble, soft, uncertain, almost sorrowful. The dog nudged something half buried in the snow. A red knit mitten. Ellie's. Mark picked it up carefully, swallowing hard. "She came through here," he whispered. Kane stepped closer, pressing his head briefly against Mark's knee, an almost human gesture of urgency. Then he bolted forward again. Mark followed. A branch cracked behind them. Mark spun, flashlight slicing the dark. Sheriff Lowell emerged with 2 deputies, snow clinging to his beard. "We followed your tracks," he said. "Kane still on the scent?" Mark held up the mitten. "Stronger than any of us." Lowell nodded. "Then let him lead." Kane moved ahead, body taut, tail low. Confidence wavering only when the wind shifted. But each time doubt flickered, he lowered his nose, drew in the air, and pressed on. Deputies spread out behind him, forming a protective arc. Occasionally someone muttered, "Find her, boy. Good dog," as if hope itself whispered through the trees. Minutes stretched, feeling like hours. Snow clung to Kane's fur in tiny white blossoms. Mark noticed the dog limping slightly, a familiar injury from years ago. But Kane refused to slow. His breath puffed in sharp clouds. His eyes never wavered. And then he stopped. Not with confusion, not with hesitation, but with a stillness so complete the forest seemed to bow around him. Kane lifted his head, ears twisting toward a faint sound Mark couldn't hear. Something fragile, wavering, like a child's sob caught in the wind. Kane's entire body leaned forward. "Mark," Lowell whispered behind him. "He found something." Kane barked once, low, deep, decisive, before bounding into the thicker darkness where Ellie's trail dipped into a ravine. Mark ran after him, breath hammering, knowing with absolute certainty, whatever Kane heard in the wind wasn't fear anymore. It was Ellie, fighting not to be forgotten. The deeper Kane pushed into the ravine, the more the night seemed to fold around him. A narrow corridor of wind, ice, and broken quiet. Mark slid down after him, boots carving shaky paths through the powdered snow. Sheriff Lowell and the deputies followed close behind, their flashlights jittering across tree trunks and tangled roots. The storm had softened to a whisper here, as if even the wind sensed something delicate beneath its breath. Kane lowered his head again, pulling in the cold air, nostrils flaring. There it was, that faint, unmistakable sweetness of a child's winter coat. A scent so fragile it could have disappeared into the night, yet somehow it clung stubbornly to the world. "Kane, easy," Mark murmured, though his voice trembled. The dog moved with a strange mix of urgency and reverence, weaving between branches as if he understood the importance of each passing second. Snow shook loose from the pines above, falling in slow spirals that glittered under their lights. It would have been beautiful, if not for the fear hanging above them like an unspoken prayer. Then Kane stopped again, this time near a gnarled elm whose bark had split under the storm's weight. He nudged something half hidden beneath a sheet of snow. Mark knelt, brushing it aside with gloved fingers. "Another glove?" he whispered. But it wasn't a glove. It was a tiny crocheted bracelet, pale lavender, the one Ellie always wore, a gift from her late mother. Mark swallowed hard and showed it to Lowell. The sheriff's jaw tightened, the kind of tightness that said everything he didn't speak aloud. Kane nudged Mark's shoulder, impatient. He wanted them to move, needed them to move. Before Mark could rise, a voice crackled through the radio. Dispatch shouting weather warnings, road closures, insurance alerts, and emergency units overwhelmed by the storm. The world outside was closing in. And yet here, in the ravine's hush, Kane's determination felt louder than any broadcast. Mark clicked the radio off. Some moments needed less noise and more faith. Kane pressed forward again, climbing a small rise. At the top, the forest opened into a clearing battered by wind. Snow ripped sideways across the space, revealing faint drag marks, long, uneven, almost erased by the storm. Lowell's breath caught. "She crawled," he muttered, voice thick. "She crawled, trying to get out." "Kane," Mark whispered, "whatever you do, don't lose it now." But Kane didn't lose it. In fact, he surged forward with such sudden strength that Mark stumbled after him. Deputies spread out, calling Ellie's name into the wind. Each call was swallowed instantly by the storm. But something in Kane's pace suggested he believed she could still hear them. He burst through a curtain of snow and skidded to a halt beside a fallen cedar tree. There, beneath branches heavy with ice, was the faint imprint of a small body. Not moving, not warm. Just an indentation holding the memory of a child who had lain there not long ago. Mark's breath stuttered. She was right here. But Kane refused to stop. He paced in a tight circle, nose tracing the edges of the indentation. He inhaled sharply. Once, twice, and then jerked his head westward, toward a trail so narrow even the deputies had missed it. "Kane," Mark whispered. Kane growled, not in warning, but insistence, his version of urgency given shape. "He's got a direction," Lowell said. "Mark, go with him." Mark didn't hesitate. He followed as Kane bolted forward again, no longer cautious, now desperate, as if Ellie's scent had suddenly sharpened into something raw and immediate, as if she had just passed by. The storm pressed around them, but Mark felt something shift inside him. Hope. Sharp. Painful. Real. "Kane," he whispered into the wind. "Don't let go of her. Not now." And as they vanished deeper into the woods, it became clear. Kane wasn't just tracking a child. He was fighting time itself. If you were out there in that storm, searching for a missing child, what would scare you the most? 1. The darkness. 2. The cold. Or 3. The fear of being too late. Kane slowed only when the forest forced him to, branches hanging low with icy weight, snow rising nearly to his chest, wind curling through the pines like a warning whispered through the dark. Mark stayed close behind, lungs burning from the climb, boots punching into powder that swallowed every sound. The world had narrowed to a single desperate thread, Ellie's faint scent clinging to the air. And then, as if pulled by something invisible, Kane veered sharply left toward a cluster of fallen trees tangled from last week's storm. "Easy, boy. Take it slow," Mark whispered, though the wind nearly stole the words away. Kane ignored him, not with disobedience, but with purpose. He pressed forward until he reached a massive limb, snapped clean from its trunk, lying across the forest floor like a barricade nature never meant to build. Beneath that heavy branch, half hidden by snow, was a small figure curled into itself. Mark froze. Ellie, her blue coat, frost-lined, still, impossibly small, peeked out from under the limb's weight. Her hair, tangled with pine needles, was pressed against her cheek. The deputies behind him stopped without needing to be told. Silence pooled around them, thick, fragile, as though the world itself feared any sudden movement might shatter what little hope remained. Kane reached her first. The dog approached slowly, lowering his body until his nose hovered inches from her cheek. A soft whine escaped him, trembling, aching, piercing deeper than any shout could. He nudged her gently, once, then again. Careful, almost reverent. Ellie stirred. Barely. But it was enough for Kane to breathe out in relief. A warm cloud in the frozen air. Mark dropped to his knees, brushing snow from her arms. "Ellie, sweetheart, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. A thin, shaky breath escaped her lips. Then a whisper, so faint it nearly vanished into the wind. "Don't leave." Mark swallowed the ache rising in his throat. "We're right here. You're not alone anymore." The fallen branch had pinned her coat, but not crushed her. She was cold, dangerously cold, but alive. Kane moved closer, pressing his warm body against her side. Ellie's fingers, stiff, pale, curled into the fur along his neck. The gesture was small, fragile, but it carried the weight of trust only a frightened child could offer. Kane shifted to shield her from the wind, his breath warming her temple. Mark watched the dog's focus, the intensity in his eyes, and whispered, "Good boy. Keep her warm." Above them, snow drifted down in slow silver flakes. The storm felt quieter here, as if the forest itself had granted a moment of mercy. Footsteps crunched behind Mark. Sheriff Lowell approached carefully, flashlight low. "Is she—" "She's alive," Mark answered, relief trembling through his voice. "We have to move her gently." Kane let out another soft sound. Not fear, not panic, but insistence, urgency, given shape. Mark squeezed Ellie's shoulder. "We're going to get you out of here, Ellie. You just hang on." The deputies worked quickly, lifting the fallen limb just enough for Mark to slide her free. Kane stayed pressed to her side the entire time, refusing to yield even an inch. When Ellie whimpered at the cold air touching her skin, Kane nudged his head beneath her arm, letting her lean on him. Her breath trembled, then steadied. Mark's eyes softened. "She trusts him," he murmured. Lowell nodded. "He's the reason we found her at all." With Ellie wrapped in Mark's jacket, they began the slow trek out of the ravine. Kane stayed glued to her side, matching every step, despite the limp beginning to show in his right leg. Ellie's small voice broke the quiet again. "Don't leave me, Kane." "I'm not leaving you," Mark whispered, though he knew the words weren't meant for him. Kane pressed his nose to Ellie's arm, his own silent promise. The storm picked up again, wind pushing against them like a living force, but the group held tight. Ahead, through frosted branches, faint emergency lights flickered, rescue vehicles waiting at the forest entrance. The sight tightened Mark's chest with relief. "We're almost there," he murmured. But Kane didn't look at the lights. He looked at Ellie. His eyes, deep, steady, unwavering, never left her, as if the only truth he trusted in this storm was the fragile heartbeat of the girl he'd found. The trek out of the ravine should have felt like progress, but the storm sharpened its claws, turning every step into a negotiation with the cold. Mark carried Ellie close to his chest, her small body wrapped in his jacket, her chilled breath barely warming the fabric. Kane stayed so near that Mark occasionally felt the dog's shoulder brush his leg. It wasn't clinging. It was vigilance. Every time Ellie exhaled, thin, wavering, Kane's ears twitched, listening to the rhythm of her fear. "Hang in there, sweetheart," Mark murmured, breath fogging. Ellie stirred slightly, her voice a broken thread. "Cold." Kane pressed his body against her side, offering what warmth he had left. Mark whispered, "Good boy." Though Kane wasn't moving for praise, he was moving for something deeper than training. Snow drifted in thick sheets, erasing familiar shapes. Sheriff Lowell led the way, radio held high. "Rescue team, we've got the girl. Ellie Carter is alive. Prep the emergency care unit." Static crackled, then a strained reply. "Copy that. Storm slowing the ambulance. Reroute to the Mercy Valley access road." Lowell shot a look at Mark. "That's a longer walk." Mark didn't falter. "We'll make it." But the path narrowed, forcing them into a tight line. Kane pushed ahead, sniffing until he found a gap through the debris. When Mark shifted Ellie's weight, she whimpered, a sound so small it pierced him clean through. Kane froze instantly, swinging his head back toward her. His gaze held steady on her face, and for a moment, the wind itself quieted. They moved again, but the strain began to show. Kane's limp grew more pronounced, his right hind leg dragging slightly in the snow. Mark slowed. "Easy, buddy. We're close." Yet Kane pushed forward, refusing to fall behind. Ellie's breath hitched, again, and Kane let out a soft grunt, part encouragement, part plea. A gust smashed into them, forcing everyone to brace. Snow slammed sideways, blinding their flashlights. "We should wait it out," one deputy shouted. We don't have time, Lowell barked. Hypothermia is already setting in. Keep moving. Then, Kane stopped. So abruptly, the line jolted behind him. What is it? Mark breathed. Kane sniffed the air, posture lowering, alert, but fearful. The storm carried something new, the distant groan of shifting ice. Tree lines unstable, Lowell muttered. Keep to the right. Mark stepped carefully, boots sinking deep. Ellie's head lulled, forehead clammy, breaths shallow. Stay with me, Ellie, he whispered. Kane leaned in, brushing his muzzle against her arm. A gesture so gentle, it nearly broke Mark. Ellie's fingers twitched, curling weakly into Kane's fur. It was fragile, but it was enough. A clearing opened ahead. Through the snowfall, distant lights flickered, red and blue, blurred by the storm. We're almost there, a deputy shouted. Hope flared. Sharp, warm, abrupt. Kane lifted his head, tail giving a faint, hopeful twitch. Then, the ground shifted. A packed shelf of snow gave way beneath Mark's feet. He staggered, nearly dropping Ellie. Kane lunged, grabbing the hem of Mark's jacket in his teeth, pulling with everything he had. Mark regained balance, heart hammering. Good boy, good boy. Kane didn't release the fabric until Mark was steady. They trudged forward again. The storm softened, as if conceding defeat. Ahead, paramedics waited beside a stretcher. Mark lowered Ellie into their arms as gently as if she were made of spun glass. Her lips moved, barely. Kane, don't leave. Kane stepped forward, pressing his forehead to hers, breathing out a tired, trembling exhale, a promise in silence. And then, he collapsed to his knees in the snow. The ambulance doors swung wide as paramedics rushed Ellie inside, their boots thudding across the icy pavement. The flood of warm light from Mercy Valley Hospital spilled into the storm like a promise. Thin, trembling, but still a promise. Mark followed, numb from cold and worry. But when he turned to call for Kane, the dog was no longer beside him. Instead, Kane knelt in the snow a few yards back, chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths. Frost clung to his fur, lifting gently in the wind. And though his body wavered, his eyes remained fixed on Ellie disappearing through the double doors. Kane, Mark called softly, stepping toward him. Come on, buddy. You made it. Kane pushed himself upright, wobbling. It wasn't just injury. It was a body running on nothing but heart. He tried to move, but his legs buckled again. Mark knelt beside him, hands trembling. Easy. We're here. You did your job. Let us do ours. Mark placed a supportive arm around Kane's torso, but the dog refused to lean. Kane gathered whatever strength remained and took a step toward the hospital entrance. A paramedic holding the door gasped softly. He walked her all the way here? Mark nodded. Carried her part of it. Quiet awe spread through those gathered at the entrance. Nurses, orderlies, late shift staff pausing mid-step as Kane limped forward, head bowed, breath fogging the air in quick, exhausted bursts. Mercy Valley had seen everything: winter accidents, cardiac emergencies, insurance claims piling up each storm season. But nothing, not one chart or file, prepared them for the sight of a dog dragging himself toward the doors, like he was following the last thread tying him to life. At the threshold, Kane hesitated. Warm air brushed his face. The smell inside was sharp, disinfectant, stale coffee from the nurse's station, a whisper of perfume lingering on someone's coat. But beneath all of that was Ellie's scent, faint, unmistakable, drifting like a beacon through the halls. And that was enough. Kane stepped in. The lobby fell silent. Conversations paused. Even the security guard, sipping lukewarm cocoa, straightened as if witnessing something sacred. Kane's paws slipped slightly on the polished floor, gait uneven, but his eyes remained bright, scanning every direction for the girl he had carried through the storm. A nurse hurried toward Mark. "We need to keep the hallway clear. Trauma team's working fast." Mark lowered his voice. "He won't get in the way. He just needs to see where she is." The nurse looked at Kane, at the determination etched into his trembling frame, and softened. "Room 3, they're stabilizing her temperature. He can stay outside the door, but don't let him push himself too far." Mark guided Kane down the corridor, but soon realized he didn't need to guide him at all. Kane already knew. He followed Ellie's scent with the same instinct that had pulled him from his kennel hours earlier. Each step was careful but resolute, claws tapping a soft, uneven rhythm on the floor. When they reached Trauma Room 3, movement flickered through the small window. Doctors shifting, blankets being adjusted, machines humming. Kane lowered himself onto the floor in front of the door, pressing his chest to the cold tile as if anchoring himself to the child on the other side. His breathing steadied. His gaze softened. Even his trembling quieted, as though being near Ellie allowed his body permission to rest. Mark crouched beside him. "She's safe now. You hear me? You brought her home." Kane didn't look at him. Instead, he slid one paw forward until it rested against the base of the door, just close enough to feel the faint vibration of movement inside. Mark exhaled a shaky breath. "All right, buddy. You stay right here." The hallway resumed its quiet bustle. Footsteps, murmured updates, the soft squeak of wheels on tile floors. Yet every few minutes, someone paused. A doctor, a nurse, a visitor wrapped in winter layers, just to take in the sight of the weary K9 stationed like a guardian beside the room. No sirens, no shouting. Just a dog who refused to close his eyes unless he felt Ellie's presence. And as Mark finally stepped aside to give Kane space, he realized something. Kane wasn't waiting for news. He was waiting for her. The moment the trauma room doors swung shut behind Ellie, the hallway seemed to lose its shape. Conversations thinned into murmurs. Even the overhead speakers, usually cycling through announcements about visiting hours and insurance paperwork, fell into an uneasy quiet. Kane lay exactly where he had lowered himself, chest pressed to the cool tile, eyes locked on the narrow window of Trauma Room 3. His breath made small clouds against the floor, fading almost as quickly as they formed. No one dared step over him. They walked around, softening their steps as though noise itself might disturb the fragile thread connecting him to the child inside. Dr. Rachel Monroe exited briefly, rubbing her forehead. Mark straightened instinctively. "How is she?" Rachel glanced at Kane first, something reverent passing through her expression. "Her temperature's still low. Heart rate is unstable. We're doing everything we can." Her voice was calm, but her eyes carried the tired weight of someone who'd seen enough winter nights to know how unpredictable they could be. She knelt beside Kane, hesitant but gentle. "You're staying right there, aren't you?" Kane lifted his head just enough to nudge her wrist. A greeting, a request, a plea. Rachel swallowed hard. "All right. You keep watch. We'll keep working." When she slipped back inside, Kane shifted closer, dragging his forelegs until they touched the door. His fur trembled. Mark crouched beside him. "She's in good hands, buddy." Kane didn't blink, didn't acknowledge him. His focus was absolute, unwavering, as if he believed Ellie would feel lost if he looked away even for a second. Minutes passed, then half an hour, then nearly an hour. Nurses came and went. Paramedics drifted back to duty. Deputies took statements. But Kane never moved. His ears twitched at every muffled sound. A footstep, equipment clicking, someone adjusting blankets. And each time he pressed his nose harder against the seam of the door, as though willing himself through it. Mark sat beside him with a sigh. "You're a stubborn one. You know that." Kane blinked once, just enough to say, "I'm not leaving." A soft gasp broke the tension. A woman in a puffy brown coat stood at the hallway's end, hand over her mouth. "Is that a police dog?" she whispered. "He brought that little girl in," the receptionist murmured. "Dragged her out of the storm himself." The woman's eyes welled. "Bless him." Soon others gathered, orderlies, visitors waiting for family, a janitor leaning on his mop, even a man in a snow-dusted suit. Something in Kane's stillness pulled people in. Not curiosity, something deeper, something like respect. Suddenly, inside the trauma bay, a spike of activity. The room glowed brighter. A nurse's voice rose sharply, strained, urgent. Kane jolted upright, claws scraping the tile. Mark reached for him. "Easy, easy." But Kane stepped forward, chest rigid, ears pinned, breath fast and shallow, as though Ellie's fear had traveled straight through the walls and settled in his bones. Then, silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that makes the whole world hold its breath. Kane whimpered. Low, aching, pushing his shoulder against the door as if he could lean hope into the room. Mark didn't speak. There were no words for the agony of waiting while someone you love fights an unseen battle. Then, a faint beep, steady, rhythmic. a sign of life beginning to return. Kane froze, then slowly lowered himself to the floor again, pressing his head against the base of the door. Relief wasn't visible on a dog's face the way it won a human's, but it lived in the quiet easing of his muscles, in the long exhale that fogged the tile beneath him. The crowd dispersed softly, sensing the shift. Mark rested a hand on Kane's back. "She's still with us," he whispered. "She's fighting." Kane closed his eyes, not in sleep, but in something close to gratitude. He would not rest. Not yet. Not until the door opened again. And when it did, he intended to be the first thing Ellie saw. The hospital night shift had a rhythm of its own. IV pumps humming, rolling carts squeaking, footsteps softened by fatigue and fluorescent light. But around Trauma Room 3, the air felt different, charged, fragile. Every nurse passing by instinctively lowered their voice, glancing toward the door where Kane lay, a silent sentinel whose presence had already melted every heart in Mercy Valley Hospital. Mark sat against the opposite wall, elbows on his knees, watching the dog more than the door. Kane hadn't moved in nearly 40 minutes, except to inch his paw closer to the threshold, as if that tiny touch kept Ellie tethered to the world. His sides rose in slow, uneven breaths. His fur, still damp from melted snow, clung in heavy patches. A faint tremor traveled his hind legs, one he tried desperately to hide. "You know you can rest, right?" Mark murmured. "She's not going anywhere." But Kane didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't acknowledge the exhaustion pulling at him. His gaze remained locked on the trauma room door. Steady, sharp, unshakable. If loyalty had a physical form, it was lying right there on the hospital floor. Inside the trauma bay, a muffled alarm chirped. Once, then again, louder. Dr. Monroe's voice cut through, clipped and urgent. "Heart rate dropping. Get warmed saline now. Move!" Shadows darted across the frosted glass window. Kane stiffened instantly, ears pricked, ribs expanding, a sharp, trembling inhale. Mark stood, heart sinking. Something's wrong. A shrill, rapid beeping spilled through the crack beneath the door. Ellie's heart monitor faltering. And that was the moment Kane rose. He didn't stand like a tired dog. He surged, muscles quaking, claws scraping the tile, a deep, raw sound pushing from his chest. Not a bark, not a cry. Something older, something primal. Two nurses froze mid-step. "Kane?" Mark whispered, startled by the intensity tightening the dog's frame. Kane stepped toward the door, pressing his shoulder against it. Not recklessly, but urgently. As if Ellie needed him right then. Right that second. The door vibrated faintly under his weight. His breathing synced with the beeping inside. Rapid, uneven, afraid. "Does he know her heart's dropping?" a nurse whispered. The older janitor shook his head slowly. "Seen dogs sense seizures, strokes. But this?" Inside, Dr. Monroe shouted, "Warming blanket! She's dipping again!" And Kane howled, not loud, not long, but devastating. a low, mournful sound that cracked open the hallway, making even those who didn't know Ellie suddenly feel they might lose someone precious. The howl softened into a whimper, then into a trembling rumble deep in his chest. Nurses stepped closer without thinking. One covered her mouth. Another whispered, "Poor boy." Kane pushed harder into the door, scratching lightly at the seam, desperate to reach her. A thud sounded inside. Equipment shifting, hurried movement. "Hold her steady! Heart rate's crashing!" Kane whimpered louder, pacing once before returning to the door with renewed force. His claws tapped anxiously. Tail stiff, breath shallow. Mark reached for him. "Buddy, you have to stay calm. She needs you to hold on." But Kane wasn't listening. Instinct, sharpened by years of K9 work and something deeper, something spiritual, guided him. He pawed the bottom of the door and let out a thin, keening cry. And then the alarm changed, from frantic beeping to steady rhythmic pulses. Inside, a nurse gasped, "She's stabilizing!" Temperatures holding. Dr. Monroe's voice softened. "Good girl. Stay with us." Kane froze mid-movement. Slowly, his ears lowered, his muscles unwound. He sank back to the tussin floor, lowering his head against the base of the door. Relief wasn't shown on his face the way it would be on a human's, but it lived in the way his body uncoiled, in the long exhale that fogged the tile beneath him. The small crowd drifted away softly, sensing the shift in the air. Mark rested a hand on Kane's back. "She's still with us," he whispered. "She's fighting." Kane closed his eyes, not in sleep, but in something close to gratitude. He would not rest. Not yet. Not until the door opened again. And in that quiet hallway, every person present understood the same truth. Kane wasn't waiting for updates. He was the update. The hallway outside Trauma Room 3 had settled into a hush so complete that even the heating vents sounded respectful. Kane lay with his head against the base of the door, his breathing slow but shallow, as if every inhale depended on the rhythm coming from inside. A few nurses lingered nearby, pretending to review charts but unable to look away from him. People had seen loyal dogs before, waiting outside stores, riding in truck beds, guarding porches. But this felt different. It felt like watching one half of a fragile bond wait for the other half to come back to life. Mark stood a few feet away, rubbing his hands together for warmth he couldn't find. The adrenaline from the storm had drained from his body, leaving behind a quiet ache, fear mixed with responsibility, guilt mixed with gratitude. He kept glancing at Kane, noticing the way the dog's chest tightened each time footsteps echoed inside the trauma room. "You're gonna make yourself sick worrying about her," Mark whispered. But he knew. Kane wouldn't stop, not until Ellie woke. The double doors at the far end burst open, and Sheriff Lowell stepped in, brushing snow from his hat. He scanned the hallway, saw Kane, and paused. "He hasn't moved?" Mark shook his head. "Not more than a few inches. He acts like she'll disappear if he blinks too long." Lowell let out a slow exhale. Dogs got more heart than half the force. He started toward them, but froze when the door behind him opened again. Ellie's father, Tom Carter, stood there, face pale, breath uneven, hands still streaked with motor oil from the garage he'd been working in when deputies found him. His eyes darted wildly until they landed on Kane. "Is she here?" he asked, voice cracking. "Is my girl... Where is she?" Mark stepped forward. "Trauma room 3. She's alive, Tom. They're warming her up, stabilizing her vitals." Tom staggered, grabbing the back of a chair for balance. Relief didn't soften him. It shook him. "I should have picked her up. She said she could walk home and God, I shouldn't have let her." Lowell placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're here now. That's what matters." Tom nodded, but his attention drifted to Kane. The dog lifted his head slowly, studying him. Kane's eyes weren't aggressive, not cold. They were tired, watchful, trusting nothing except the thin thread tying him to Ellie. Tom knelt beside him. "You found her," he whispered. "You brought my little girl home." His voice broke on the last word. Kane didn't move, but something in his stillness softened. A quiet acknowledgement. Inside the trauma room, the hum of machines shifted. Kane's ears flicked up. His head rose higher. Mark and Tom both noticed, trusting the dog's instincts more than any sound from behind the glass. A nurse stepped out, startled by the worried cluster. "She's holding steady," she said gently. "Her temperature is coming up. It'll take time, but she's responding." Tom covered his face, shoulders shaking. Thank God. Gratitude filled the hallway like warm breath on a cold window. The nurse crouched to stroke Kane's head. "And you did half our job getting her here." Kane's tail thumped once, faint, almost imperceptible. Tom sank to the floor beside him. "You know," he whispered, "Ellie's mom used to say angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they have paws." His voice cracked. "I didn't believe her." Kane blinked slowly, exhaustion pulling his eyelids down. Tom leaned closer. "But you proved her right tonight." Mark leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes. The storm outside still raged. Insurance alerts buzzing on phones, roads closing left and right. But here, in this hallway, something gentler settled. Fear hadn't left, but hope had arrived, and it came on 4 legs. Kane lowered his head again, pressing closer to the door. His breathing steadied, as if syncing with Ellie's. 2 heartbeats separated by a wall that felt thinner by the minute. And everyone watching sensed the same truth. Neither of them would face the night alone. The hallway outside Trauma Room 3 had quieted into that late-night stillness hospitals know all too well, when even the vending machines hum softer, and people speak as though sound itself might shatter hope. Tom sat slumped beside the door, fingers laced, praying without realizing he was. Mark leaned against the wall, replaying every step through the storm, every decision that might have gone wrong. But Kane, Kane had not moved in over an hour. His head rested against the door. His breath was thin, stretched. Each inhale a fragile negotiation with exhaustion. A subtle tremor worked along his flank, easy to miss, unless you were watching closely. And Mark was watching. "Buddy," he whispered, crouching down. "You've got to rest. Just a minute. Lay on your side, you're shaking." But Kane didn't shift, didn't blink. His eyes stayed locked on the sliver of light beneath the door, as though Ellie's heartbeat was flowing through it. Then, a change inside the trauma room. Movement. Sharper, hurried. Kane reacted instantly, head lifting, body stiffening, ears snapping forward. A soft growl pushed from his chest. Not fear, but recognition. A nurse stepped into the hallway for supplies. Kane rose halfway, wobbling. Mark reached for him. "Easy, stay down." The nurse knelt beside him, concern tightening her voice. "He's exhausted. He needs fluids, heat. He shouldn't be standing." But Kane was standing. Barely. His legs trembled like they were arguing with him. But his gaze never left the door. Inside, another alarm chirped. Not as urgent as earlier, but enough to draw every head toward the noise. Tom pressed his palm to the window. "What's happening?" The nurse soothed him gently. "They're adjusting her warming protocol. It's normal." But Kane did not believe the reassurance. His instincts lived deeper than explanations. He pressed forward. And that was when it happened. His body sagged, shoulders dropping, front legs folding, as if someone had quietly pulled the strength out from under him. Mark lunged. "Kane!" Kane hit the tile hard, chest bouncing once before settling. A single rough exhale scraped from his throat. The hallway froze. A resident stopped mid-step. The receptionist stood. The janitor dropped his mop. Tom stumbled beside the dog, voice breaking. "No, nobody, stay with us. Don't you do this now." Mark slid his arms under Kane's neck, lifting his head slightly. His hands trembled. Kane's eyes fluttered, unfocused, hazy. He wasn't looking at Mark. He wasn't looking at Tom. He was trying, and failing to focus on the door. "Kane, look at me," Mark pleaded. "Please, you saved her. Let us save you." Dr. Rachel Monroe burst from the trauma room, startled by the crowd. "Oh God." She dropped to her knees beside Kane, hands moving with the precision of a seasoned ER physician. She checked his gums, his pulse, pressed her palm to his chest. Her jaw tightened. "He's severely dehydrated, hypothermic. He pushed himself too far. He probably hasn't stopped fighting since he ran from the K9 unit." Tom's voice trembled. Can he make it?" Rachel hesitated, a silence heavy enough to fracture the air. "If we move fast. He needs warming, oxygen, fluids, immediately. But he's crashing." Kane whimpered, barely audible, stretching a paw toward the door, reaching for Ellie. Rachel's expression crumpled. He's trying to get to her, even now. Then let him stay here, Tom said, voice breaking. Right here. Don't take him away. Rachel looked between them. Mark, Tom, the small gathering of witnesses, and the dog lying like a soldier refusing to fall anywhere but at his post. Finally, she nodded. Fine. We'll work on him here. Nurses hurried back with blankets and a portable heater. Someone fetched warm IV bags from the supply cabinet. The hallway transformed into a quiet operation bay. Movements reverent, voices low, each gesture guided by compassion, gratitude, awe. Rachel wrapped Kane with steady, gentle hands. Stay with us, boy. She's fighting in there. You fight out here. Kane's eyelids fluttered. His breathing steadied. Slightly, but each inhale still seemed to cost him. Mark stroked his head. You're not losing her. Not tonight. Tom wiped tears from his oil-stained hands. If my daughter lives, it'll be because of you. So don't you give up. Warmth filled the hallway. Soft, slow, expanding. Kane's body relaxed by degrees, but his gaze, though weakened, stayed fixed on the door. Even collapsing, even shaking, even slipping toward unconsciousness. He guarded Ellie's threshold as if the world depended on it. And perhaps it did. Outside, the storm had eased into a soft, whispering snowfall, tapping gently against the hospital windows. But inside Trauma Room 3, the air remained thick with tension. Machines hummed steadily now, rhythmic tones offering quiet reassurance. Dr. Monroe, exhausted but relentless, made one last adjustment to the warming blanket before stepping back. She's stabilizing, she murmured, though she didn't yet allow herself to relax then. Ellie's eyelashes fluttered, only for a second, but enough for the nurse beside her to gasp softly. Rachel, she's trying. Dr. Monroe leaned in. Ellie, sweetheart, can you hear me? What came next was barely a breath, a stir beneath the heavy fog of sleep and cold. Ellie's fingers twitched against the blanket. Her inhale grew deeper. Warmth was returning, inch by inch. Then her eyes opened, not fully, just a narrow parting, like a curtain lifting to check if dawn had arrived. Confusion flickered. Then memory crashed back into her, hard enough to break her tiny breaths into trembling pieces. Dr. Monroe touched her shoulder. You're safe now, Ellie. You're at Mercy Valley Hospital. We've got you. But Ellie wasn't listening. Her gaze drifted, past the doctor, past the machines, toward the door. She tried to lift her hand, only a few inches, before it fell back onto the blanket. Kane. The word cracked into the smallest whisper. The nurse covered her mouth, eyes stinging. Dr. Monroe looked toward the hallway, breath catching. He's right outside, she whispered. He never left you. Ellie squeezed her eyes shut, a tear sliding free. Kane, is he? Okay? Rachel's voice softened. He's tired, but he's here. He's fighting to stay awake for you. Ellie swallowed, breath trembling. Can he come in? Rachel hesitated. Policy, safety, cleanliness. But then she remembered. Kane collapsing, paw stretching for the door, refusing to move, refusing to sleep, refusing to leave her. She stood. Let me check on him. When she stepped into the hallway, the sight pulled her heart tight. Kane lay on a thick blanket nurses had placed beneath him. His head rested on Mark's lap. A heater warmed the space, making the air softer, kinder. His breathing had steadied, but was still far from strong. His eyes, half open, clouded with exhaustion, remained angled toward the bottom of the door. Watching. Waiting. Mark looked up. How is she? Rachel exhaled a shaky smile. She asked for him. Mark's breath escaped in relief. Tom bowed his head, wiping his face with shaking hands. Thank God. Thank God. Rachel approached Kane, kneeling. Hey, hero, she whispered, stroking his face as she's awake and she wants to see you. Kane's eyes sharpened. Just a flicker, but unmistakable. He tried to lift his head, nearly managed, before gravity dragged it back down. A soft rumble vibrated from his chest. Part whine, part plea. I know, Rachel murmured. You want to go to her. We'll do this carefully. With Mark's help, she guided Kane to his feet. His legs trembled violently, nearly giving out. Tom rushed in, adding his support. Inch by inch, they helped him toward the trauma room door. Rachel pushed it open gently. Inside. Ellie turned her head. Her lips parted in a fragile smile far too big for her small, weakened body. Kane. The dog's tail moved, slow, exhausted, but full of knowing. They brought him to her bedside. Kane lowered himself carefully, resting his chin on the edge of the mattress. Ellie reached out, fingers trembling, brushing them against his muzzle. You found me, she whispered. Kane closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. No bark, no sound, just a deep exhale, as if he'd been holding his breath since the moment she disappeared into the storm. Ellie's tears stained the blanket. Don't leave me, Kane. He nuzzled her hand again. Faint, but determined. And everyone in the room felt the truth settle like warm light chasing winter shadows. She came back because he refused to stop looking. He survived because she refused to let go. For a few long moments, the world inside Trauma Room 3 shrank to the space between Ellie's trembling fingertips and Kane's weary muzzle. Every machine, every voice, every winter-dimmed light seemed to quiet itself around that fragile reunion. Ellie stroked him with the softness of someone touching a miracle she wasn't sure she deserved. Kane leaned into her hand, his breathing shallow but steady, as if simply feeling her skin restored something life had nearly taken. Tom stood at the foot of the bed, work-worn hands twisting nervously. He watched his daughter's face, watched color finally warming her cheeks, and the tension that had held him upright since the deputies found him began to loosen. "Hey, Peanut," he whispered, voice husky. "You scared the life out of us." Ellie turned her head, her hand still resting atop Kane's head. "Daddy, Kane didn't leave me. Not even when it got dark." Tom swallowed hard, eyes shimmering. He brushed a strand of damp hair from her forehead. "No, sweetheart, he didn't." Mark lingered near the doorway, giving the family space while keeping a watchful eye on Kane's condition. The dog's heartbeat, faint beneath his ribs, thudded in a fragile rhythm. His exhaustion clung to every muscle. Yet he kept his chin anchored to Ellie's mattress, unwilling to move even an inch away from her. Dr. Monroe entered quietly, clipboard pressed to her chest. She paused, her expression softening at the sight before her. "Ellie, sweetheart, how do you feel?" Ellie blinked slowly. "Warm, because Kane's here." Rachel smiled, emotion tugging at her voice. "Well, your rescuer is just as stubborn as you are." Kane exhaled a rough breath, lifting his gaze to meet hers. She knelt beside him, checking his temperature with the back of her hand. "You're not out of danger either, big guy," she murmured. "You need fluids, warmth, rest." Kane closed his eyes, but didn't move away. Rachel laughed softly. "Not leaving, Thought so. Time was." Ellie shifted weakly, moving her hand toward Kane's collar. Her fingers curled around the leather strap, like she was anchoring herself to him. "Please don't take him away," she whispered. "He gets scared when I'm scared." The room stilled, touched by the honesty only a child could give. Tom's eyes shone. Mark cleared his throat. Even Rachel had to blink hard before answering. "No one is taking him away," she said softly. "Not tonight." Ellie's eyes fluttered closed in relief, her body sinking deeper into the blankets, her hand never leaving Kane's collar. As she drifted, Kane watched her with unwavering intensity, until finally the heaviness of the night settled over him too. Tom stepped closer, brushing Kane's fur gently. "You're a good boy," he whispered. "Better than I ever deserved for her." Kane opened one eye, gave a faint thump of his tail. Just once, but enough to make the grown man smile through tears. Outside the window, snow drifted lazily under a street lamp, the storm now a pale memory. Inside, however, something warmer formed. An unspoken understanding shared between strangers united by a child and a dog who had walked through winter together. Mark pulled up a chair near the foot of the bed. "I'll keep an eye on him while he rests," he said. "He won't let himself sleep unless someone stays." Tom nodded. "Thank you for everything." Rachel reached the door, paused, and turned back. "Ellie?" The girl opened her eyes just a sliver. "You're stronger than you know," Rachel said softly. "And you too. You're something rare." Ellie looked at Kane, then at the doctor. He found me when no one else could. Rachel smiled. Yes, and you kept him going when he should have given up. Those words, simple, quiet, wrapped themselves around the room, settling deeper than any winter chill ever could. Minutes passed. Ellie drifted into peaceful sleep. Kane, finally allowing himself to close his eyes, rested his head fully onto her mattress. Their breathing synced, gentle, steady, shared. No one spoke, because some moments are too sacred for words. If you were standing in that room, which moment would stay with you longest? 1. Ellie waking up. 2. Kane lifting his head. Or 3. Their hands and paws finding each other again. Morning crept slowly into Mercy Valley Hospital, thinning the darkness inch by inch, until pale light spilled across the trauma ward. Snow still clung to the windows, but the storm had finally passed. Inside Ellie's room, the world felt softened, muted, warm, shaped by the steady breathing of a child and the quiet presence of the dog who refused to leave her side. Kane slept in uneven stretches, chin resting on the mattress, wrapped in a blanket the nurses insisted he needed, accepted only because Ellie's hand rested on the edge of it. Tom had dozed off in a chair, head drooping forward, fingers still twitching from a night of panic and prayer. Mark sat across from him, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching over the two beings whose bond had rewired the atmosphere of the entire hospital. Every time Ellie shifted, or Kane exhaled too sharply, both men looked up, afraid to miss something. Around 7 a.m., the door eased open. A soft, careful creak. A tall man stepped inside, pausing beyond the threshold. Ethan Ward, one of Tom's oldest friends, a figure who had helped raise Ellie in small ways since her mother passed. He held his hat against his chest, face pale from cold and worry. "Tom," he whispered, "I came as soon as I heard." Tom startled awake, blinking rapidly before recognizing him. "Ethan, you're here." Relief washed through him, followed quickly by guilt. I should have picked her up from school. She said she was fine. I thought she'd be okay." Ethan placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You didn't know, Tom. Snow Ridge gets dark fast in storms. Any one of us could have made the same call." Tom shook his head, staring at his daughter with a look both tender and broken. "I can't lose her too, not after her mom." Ethan crouched beside him. "You didn't lose her. And from what they told me, that's because of him." He glanced toward Kane, awe softening his expression. Never seen loyalty like that. "Time was." Ellie stirred at the sound of voices. Her eyelids fluttered before opening just a crack. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. She slid her fingers into Kane's fur. The dog responded instantly, eyes opening, tail giving a faint thump against the blanket. Ethan pressed a hand to his mouth. "She's awake." Tom reached her bedside, kneeling so he was eye level. "Morning, Peanut." Ellie gave the smallest smile. "Daddy, is Kane okay?" Her first true question since waking, filled with concern, not fear. Tom swallowed. He's tired, sweetheart, but he's right here. Ellie nodded weakly, then looked toward Ethan. Hi, Uncle Ethan. He chuckled, the sound cracking around its edges. Morning, kiddo. You scared all of us, even Kane. She blinked. He never gets scared. Ethan glanced at the dog. Last night he did, but only for you. The room quieted again, filled with the soft beeping of machines and the hum of heaters. Rachel Monroe entered, smiling warmly. She's improving, she said. Her vitals steadied overnight. She looked to the men, but she'll need a few days of rest. Trauma like hers settles deep. Tom nodded, squeezing Ellie's hand. We're not going anywhere. Rachel knelt beside Kane, checking his pulse again. And you, she murmured, are stronger than you look. But don't think this gets you out of treatment. You'll need fluids, maybe an IV, monitoring. Kane watched her calmly, agreeing only because Ellie was safe. Mark leaned forward. Doc, can he stay with her during treatment? He hesitated. I know policy is strict, but... Rachel looked between them. Ellie holding on to Kane, and Kane responding to every breath she took. She exhaled. Certain rules can bend when a miracle walks through your door. Yes, he stays. Tom looked up, tears bright again. Thank you. Rachel smiled softly. Honestly, I'd be afraid to separate them. A gentle laugh fluttered through the room, soft as drifting snow. Ellie's voice broke the quiet. Daddy? Yes, sweetheart. You won't let Kane go, right? Tom shook his head instantly. No, baby. Kane's family now. The dog lifted his head just enough to rest it more firmly against her side, his breathing syncing with hers again. And though exhaustion still clung to him, a warmth spread through the room, a warmth that had nothing to do with heaters or medical care. Ethan exhaled softly. Late or not, we made it in time. Rachel nodded. Sometimes life gives you just enough time, no more, no less. And in that small, crowded room, surrounded by winter light and the scent of hospital linens, a family, broken, frightened, healing, found itself stitched together again. By midday, word had already spilled beyond the walls of Mercy Valley Hospital, drifting through the snow-covered streets of Snow Ridge like a quiet rumor that grew warmer each time it was repeated. First, it reached the diner on Main Street, where truckers paused mid-coffee to listen. Then it floated into the hardware store, old men in flannel jackets setting down their baskets just to ask, "The Carter girl, is it true the K9 saved her?" Snow Ridge wasn't a big place. News didn't travel fast because of phones or social media. It traveled fast because people still cared. By the time the winter sun dipped behind the ridge, the hospital lobby had begun to fill with townsfolk, each carrying whatever comfort they thought might help. A crocheted blanket, a stuffed bunny, homemade cookies wrapped in foil. Children held up hand-drawn signs scribbled in crayon. Kane, our hero, and welcome back, Ellie. Nurses tried to keep the hallways clear, but even they couldn't help pausing to watch the slow parade of kindness. Visitors left cards filled with messages of courage, hope, and prayers for the dog's recovery. One elderly woman insisted on paying for Ellie's future health care insurance, though Tom gently declined with watery eyes. Tonight, it felt like the whole town's heartbeat had synced with the girl who almost didn't come home. Inside Ellie's room, she rested with her head turned toward the woo. Snow Ridge woke under a soft winter sun the morning Ellie was finally cleared to go home. The storm had passed, leaving a thin, shining quilt of snow across the town. Inside Mercy Valley Hospital, the air felt warmer than usual, shaped by relief and quiet gratitude for a child who had survived the night, and the dog who had carried her through it. Ellie sat on the edge of her bed, wrapped in a teal coat someone from town had left for her, embroidered with a tiny white heart on the sleeve. Kane stood beside her, still recovering but steady enough to walk. A small bandage peeked through his fur. His steps were slow, but his eyes stayed fixed on Ellie with a soft, watchful calm. Tom knelt to help her with her boots. "Ready to go home, Peanut?" Ellie nodded, but her hand reached for Kane's fur. "Only if he comes too." Tom smiled gently. "He goes wherever you do." Kane nudged her hand, confirming the new truth between them. As they stepped into the hallway, nurses, doctors, even visiting families paused to offer small smiles and quiet waves. The staff, many of whom had stayed past their shifts the night Ellie was brought in, felt a strange pride watching her walk with Kane beside her. When the elevator doors opened to the lobby, Ellie froze. Outside behind the glass, dozens of townspeople had gathered again. Children with crayon signs, adults holding flowers, neighbors carrying warm casseroles and handmade blankets. They weren't cheering. They were simply present. Present in that gentle way only small towns truly understand. Tom whispered, "Looks like the whole town's been waiting." Mark stepped forward from the crowd. "Snow Ridge wanted to welcome its bravest girl home," he said. Then he looked at Kane, and the dog who never stopped believing she was alive. Rachel Monroe joined them, placing a hand on Ellie's shoulder. "You'll need rest," she reminded, "but you're going to be just fine." Ellie looked up with a sleepy smile. "Kane helps me feel better." Rachel chuckled softly. "That doesn't surprise me at all." Outside, the cold air kissed Ellie's cheeks as the sliding doors opened. Kane pressed close, warming her side with his body. The snow glowed beneath the morning sun, and the luminary bags lining the walkway flickered gently even in daylight. Tom lifted Ellie into the truck, and Kane jumped in after her. Slower than usual, but purposeful. Ellie leaned her head